Did that money help you at all? The bowl of mashed potatoes froze mid-air, my father's hand still extended toward me, but his voice seemed to freeze the entire room. What money? I blurted out, my fork and knife hovering over my plate. The sounds at the table vanished instantly, as if even the clink of spoons against plates had fallen silent. My mother, Linda, lowered the wine glass she'd just raised to her lips, her hand trembling slightly, though she always maintained an air of calm composure. Matthew, my older brother, began cutting his meat into smaller pieces, even though he'd already finished his main course. Lily, his wife, stared blankly at the familiar floral wallpaper that had adorned this dining room for decades. I was the only one to speak. What money, Dad? Before I continue this story, if you're listening from a far-off city or just stumbled upon this, let me know where you're reading from below. This isn't your typical family tale. If you've ever uncovered a shocking truth at a family dinner, you'll understand me. Hit follow if you want to hear more stories about family things we never dare say out loud. My name is Emily Sanders. I'm 28, formerly a finance worker in New York. There was a time I thought I could be invincible. The independent woman living in a sleek apartment across from Central Park, sipping flat whites in the morning, rushing to afternoon meetings. But that map crumbled 3 months ago. A corporate restructuring cut 30% of the finance department, including me. I pretended to my family that I was exploring new paths, still working, still wearing lipstick, and posting coffee stories. Meanwhile, I was selling my belongings, cutting up my Metro card, and battling migraines that could knock me out for a week. But that day in the wooden-framed house in Vermont, under the warm glow of the chandelier, when my father asked about that money, I knew every wall in this family was about to crack. How did he know who told him, and what money was he talking about? I sat, frozen, my mind spinning with guesses. Lily set her cutlery down, her forced smile fading, her lips trembling. Matthew avoided my gaze. It was as if they all knew. Everyone except me. Dad blinked softly. Well, your mother said she sent you some help. Mom suddenly set her glass down too hard, wine splashing onto the tablecloth. It was just some homemade granola and those socks you like. A story that began with granola and ended with shattered trust. I pressed on. Mom, Dad, what money are you talking about? Is someone sending me money? What's... Mom's face hardened, a faint flush creeping in. Matthew closed his eyes. Lily shook her head slightly. Something broken was pressing down on the quiet surface of this house, once filled only with candles, their warm scent, and crowded family dinners. Mom's lips moved, her hand on her chest. Emily, I just wanted you to be safe. You never said anything. I had to help. I sat stunned. Who sent it? You sent me money. Since when? Dad turned sharply to Mom, shock etched on his face. Linda, what are you talking about? In just a few sentences, that dining table was no longer a place of togetherness. It was where truth began to unravel. No one spoke for nearly a minute. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Outside, the wind brushed through the red-tinted maple trees. The scent of Mom's cinnamon apple candle lingered, but it no longer felt warm. Mom let out a slow sigh. Since May, I've been sending $2,000 to your account every month. I exhaled sharply as if the air had been sucked from my lungs. $2,000 every month. Dad, no longer angry, looked at Mom as if seeing her for the first time. Where did that money come from? Her voice shrank to a thread. From your mother's jewelry. The heirloom set we were saving for Emily. For her wedding day. I stood up my chair, scraping loudly across the wooden floor. You sold Grandma's jewelry. The pieces you always said were our legacy. You didn't tell me. You didn't tell Dad. You hid it from everyone. Mom buried her face in her hands. Dad didn't move. Matthew bowed his head. Lily wiped away tears. I looked at each person in my family, every one of them knew. I was the last. I stumbled to the living room after that dinner, barely recalling what I said to excuse myself. Dad's initial question echoed in my mind. Did that money help you at all? I wanted to scream that it didn't because I didn't know where it came from. But the truth was it had helped. It kept my lights on, food in my fridge, allowed me to survive another month without calling home to say I'm unemployed. And that was what humiliated me most. Not that I was helped, but that I needed help and couldn't admit it. That night, lying in my childhood bedroom, I couldn't sleep. The room remained unchanged from 6 years ago, when I left pale pink walls, a small owl-shaped nightlight, a window overlooking the yard where I used to read. I stared through the glass, wondering if this was the start of the truth. How much more would come to light? And why did everyone I loved believe I couldn't handle it? I once believed that with hard work and resilience, I could hold on to everything I'd built. That belief began to crumble one Friday afternoon as I typed the final lines of a quarterly report on the 24th floor when the HR director called me into her office. No one else was there. No preamble needed. I'm so sorry, Emily. I remember every word. The stale coffee smell in the corner of the meeting room, the late afternoon sun slanting through frosted glass the way she avoided my eyes as she handed me the termination letter. 30%. That was the number repeated in the internal memo after the restructuring. I was part of it despite my A+ performance reviews. Not because I wasn't good enough, but because they needed to cut. That was it. When I left the building, I didn't cry. I even smiled at the security guard as if I were just stepping out for a late lunch. I didn't go home right away. I walked for nearly 3 hours around Midtown aimlessly as if I had a destination. Only when night fell and my phone battery died did I take a cab back to my overpriced apartment. The first week I told everyone I was taking a short break. The second week I dressed in office attire, left at 8 a.m., and sat in the public library as if it were my new workplace. I applied for jobs daily, tweaking my resume until I memorized every skill description, but responses were few. When they came, they were polite rejections. By the fourth week, I sat staring at my bank account for hours. The numbers dwindled, and I still hadn't called home. I started selling things. First, the unused gala dresses designer bags. Then the watch I'd bought myself at 26. Finally, the car I'd been paying off for 2 years. I moved out of my bright, quiet Upper West Side apartment into a small studio near a subway station where the rumble of trains and footsteps never stopped. The walls were so thin I could hear water running in the apartment above. My old roommate Rachel offered to let me stay with her for a few months. She was the kind of person always ready to help. But I declined, my tone light but firm. I'm fine. I just need a little time. I couldn't admit even to Rachel that I was terrified of becoming a burden. I got good at hiding. I learned to say I'm exploring new opportunities instead of I haven't found a job. I ordered the cheapest menu item with a casual air. I declined invitations without raising suspicion. And I was best at hiding the fear that gripped me every morning, the dread that no one would call today either. The headaches started. At first, they were mild aches, then full-blown migraines that left me unable to open my eyes in daylight. I'd lie in the dark curtains drawn, clutching my forehead, teeth gritted in pain. I had no health insurance. The last time I bought medication, I put it on a credit card and paid in installments for 3 months. One night during a particularly bad migraine, I almost texted Mom. Mom, I need help. I deleted it before sending. I called home every week. Mom would ask, "How's work, honey?" I'd reply, "Great, Mom. I'm swamped with a new project." Each lie was a brick in a wall, growing taller every week, separating me from the people I loved. New York doesn't wait for anyone. The city runs on speed and necessity. If you can't keep up, you're left behind, no warning, no signal. I used to love that about it. Now I feared it. One day I ran into Thomas, an old colleague in Brooklyn. "You still at Midtown?" he asked. I nodded. "Of course, just visiting a friend." He didn't question it. Or if he did, he was polite enough not to say. I walked away faster, my heart pounding with guilt. Independence. That was the word I'd once worn like a badge. I didn't ask for help. I didn't complain. I didn't cry out. But at some point, the line between independence and stubbornness became too thin. I don't know exactly when I crossed it. Maybe when I refused Rachel's offer. Maybe when I deleted that text to Mom. Or maybe when I saw the first unexpected deposit in my account, and instead of asking who sent it, I just breathed a sigh of relief. I needed the money. I needed medicine. I needed to eat, and I was too exhausted to care why it was there. I thought I'd tell the truth next time. But next time passed. Then another. Silence became a habit. Part of me started to believe that if I pretended long enough, things would fix themselves. They didn't. They only got worse quietly and steadily like a dripping faucet in the night. One night I lay on the bathroom floor, the dim yellow light casting shadows on the peeling ceiling. I couldn't cry anymore. Even tears were tired. I whispered to myself, "Tomorrow I'll tell the truth." But tomorrow I called Mom, laughed, and said everything's fine. The truth was I wasn't afraid of disappointing them. I was afraid of their pity. I feared Mom's eyes softening over the phone. I feared Dad's voice dropping low. I feared Matthew saying, "I told you you should have stayed in Vermont." I didn't want to be the girl who promised to stand tall in New York, only to return 6 years later with nothing. I didn't know that my silence was the real failure. I returned to Vermont in October as I did every month for our regular family dinner. I had my script ready, a few lines about a busy job office, anecdotes, a sprinkle of polished lies. Mom would nod. Dad would ask a couple of questions and it would all pass. I never imagined that one simple question from Dad, "Did that money help you at all?" would bring everything crashing down. I'd kept my secret to protect my pride. But secrets, as I was about to learn, never stay quiet. If I'd paid attention earlier, I might have noticed things weren't the same. The signs were there, clear as morning sunlight through a window. But like someone clinging to a breaking branch, I chose to look away. I arrived in Vermont on a Friday afternoon in early October. The sky was a pale blue like frosted glass, and the maple trees lining the road to the house were turning gold, red, and orange, autumn's herald. My parents' house was the same white-painted colonial wide porch balcony wrapping around like an embrace, but it felt quieter. Not the cozy quiet of before, but a cautious stillness, as if every sound was weighed before being allowed to exist. Mom greeted me at the door, still in her apron. She hugged me longer than usual, and when she pulled back, her eyes studied me so closely I had to ask, "Are you okay, Mom?" She smiled, a bit forced. "You look a little pale. Are you eating enough?" I gave a weak laugh, dodging. "Work's been hectic, you know." Another lie. Matthew and Lily were already there, sitting in the living room, with Dad sipping wine and eating cheese. Matthew stood to give me a one-armed hug, then sat back down quickly. He didn't meet my eyes. Lily was the opposite, overly attentive. She asked about my apartment city life work. But her questions, slow, overly gentle, felt like she was talking to someone who'd just suffered a loss. It was strange, but I didn't ask. The living room looked the same, but small changes stood out. Dad's favorite armchair was slightly off-center. The vase on the table held wilted flowers, and a new ultrasound photo sat on the fireplace mantel. "Congrats." I smiled at Lily, pointing to the frame. She blushed. "Thanks. I know you're busy, but if you have time, we should grab coffee. You can tell me about New York." "Sure," I nodded. But inside, something felt like it was cracking. At dinner, they asked about my job more than usual. Mom changed the subject whenever money came up. When Matthew talked about Dad's company, Dad stayed quiet, only sipping his wine. "Your company's working with the Burlington mayor, right?" Matthew said. Dad nodded. "Good, keep it up." No further comment. After dinner, I helped Mom wash dishes. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the last plate. "Mom, is something wrong?" She paused. "No, nothing. I'm just a little tired." "Matthew seems off. He's acting strange." She didn't answer right away. Then, in a voice soft as a breath, "Life changes when you have a kid, Emily. You might not understand yet." I looked up at her. Her eyes darted away. I went to my old bedroom, still pale pink walls, the owl nightlight Dad bought me in 6th grade. But now I felt out of place in what used to be my sanctuary. Everyone seemed to know something I didn't. The way they looked at each other. The way they looked at me. Like they were performing a scripted play and I was the only one without a copy. The next morning, I overheard Matthew and Mom talking in the living room as I came downstairs for water. Matthew's voice was low but clear. "You should have told Emily sooner. She's not a kid," Mom replied. "She's fragile right now. She needs to think she's still in control." I froze on the stairs, my hand gripping the wooden railing. After everyone left, I returned to the living room, standing before the ultrasound photo. I noticed it had no dust. It was new, a distraction, or a placeholder for something else. I went into Dad's study, something I hadn't done in years. The room was tidy, but his desk held a stack of new papers, bills, bank transfer receipts. I didn't have the courage to open them. When I stepped out, Mom's eyes were waiting at the door. "What were you looking for in there, Emily?" I froze. The truth. Because I think everyone's hiding something from me. She didn't respond. She just turned away silently. That night, I stayed awake. My mind was a puzzle of scattered pieces, averted glances, half-spoken words, forced concern. I was no longer just suspicious. I was certain something was wrong. And if I didn't dig deeper, I'd always be the last to know the truth about my own life. The next morning, I made coffee, sat at the dining table, and opened my phone. I started with the bank. Not every fracture makes a sound. Some break silently quiet but fierce. And I heard it not with my ears, but with my heart the moment Mom confessed the truth. That morning, after a sleepless night, I sat at the dining table, my coffee cold. I opened my banking app, checking transactions for the first time instead of skimming past. And there they were. Recurring deposits every first of the month. Not small sums, $2,000. Sender internal credit. Confidential. I'd never questioned it, too desperate to doubt. When the money arrived, I just breathed easier. But now, looking back, I saw it. Clearly, the help wasn't from the universe. It had intent. When Mom walked into the kitchen carrying a plate of toast, I didn't wait. "When did you start sending me money?" She froze just slightly, but enough for me to know she understood. She set the plate down, sat across from me. "Since May, when I found out you lost your job." My face burned. "Who told you I never said anything?" "Eliza. She saw you leaving a job center in Manhattan. She didn't know whether to tell me, but she called in the end." I bit my lip. It felt like I'd been spied on while trying to hold on to my pride. "And you started sending money?" I asked. She nodded. "I only meant to do it once. But then I thought you needed time to stabilize. I didn't want you to come back because you failed. You've worked so hard, but I didn't know you didn't ask. You didn't tell. You hid it." My voice was louder than usual. Mom looked down, her hands clasped tightly. "Have you ever accepted help, Emily? When your car broke down, when your rent went up, you always said, 'I'll manage.' I couldn't just watch you collapse." I stood pacing around the table, unable to sit still. The kitchen was serene, but a storm raged inside me. "Where did the money come from?" She looked up, her eyes cloudy. "From your grandmother's jewelry." I went still. "The jewelry meant for my wedding." She nodded. "I know you cherished it, but you needed the money more. And your grandmother once said, 'The real value isn't in gold or silver, it's in helping someone when they need it.'" I didn't know if I was angry or hurt. The feeling of having a piece of my memory, my dream taken even for a good reason, still felt like betrayal. Dad's footsteps echoed from the hallway. He'd just woken up, hair disheveled, shirt unbuttoned. "What's going on?" I didn't speak. Mom looked at him, then down. "I've been sending money to Emily since May." Dad stopped. He looked at me, then her. His eyes darkened. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew you'd stop me." "Damn right, because that wasn't your decision to make alone. That was family money, a legacy." "It's our daughter," Mom shot back the first time I'd heard her raise her voice. I stepped back. They, the perfect couple in my eyes, were arguing like strangers. These sounds didn't belong in this house. "We always made decisions together," Dad said. "And now you hide things, sell your mother's things." "And you didn't tell me about the company loan," Mom interrupted. The air froze. I turned to Dad. "What loan?" He went silent. His eyes drifted, then he sighed deeply. "I took out a mortgage on the house to cover some temporary issues at the company. I was going to tell you when things got better." So it wasn't just Mom hiding from Dad. Dad was hiding from Mom. And I was kept in the dark by everyone. My family, the symbol of stability in my memory, was a maze of secrets. After Dad stormed upstairs, Mom stood trembling. "I'm sorry. I just wanted to help, but I didn't know how." I stepped toward her but didn't hug her. "I wasn't ready. I only said I didn't need the money. I needed to be trusted enough to make my own choices." That night I sat on the porch staring at the stars. In my hand was the bracelet Grandma left, the only piece Mom hadn't sold. Its stones glinted under the moonlight, but they no longer felt warm. I realized help isn't enough if it comes without trust. Silence, even born of love, can still wound. The next morning, Mom handed me an envelope. "Your grandmother left this. I think you should read it." I opened it, a yellowed page with her familiar slanted handwritings. "If one day you find your family breaking because of silence, remember, silence is the sharpest knife. Speak to each other even when it's hard." I folded it gently, pressing it to my chest. Some threads seem invisible, but bind a family tightly, and when one snaps, the whole chain of secrets unravels. I still remember the moment Matthew stood up, his eyes no longer dodging mine like the night before. That breakfast was suffocatingly silent. Mom was making coffee, Dad was reading the paper without turning a page, and I was chewing cold toast that tasted like nothing. Matthew broke the quiet. "Emily, you're not the only one who didn't know. Dad didn't know Mom was sending you money. But I did." I dropped my toast. "What?" He nodded. "Mom told me not to say anything, worried you'd be embarrassed. But since August, she had nothing left to sell." Mom flinched slightly. I turned to her, my heart pounding. "So, the money after that?" Matthew answered for her. "Some of it came from me. From mine and Rachel's savings." I felt choked. "Your savings for the baby." "Mom was crying, saying she couldn't stop helping you and things were still unresolved. And I didn't think much. You're my sister." I was speechless. I didn't know what hurt, more being helped behind my back or becoming an unspoken burden to those closest to me. Dad set the paper down. His voice was cold as winter wood. "How long were you all planning to keep this from me?" Mom reached for him, but he brushed her hand away. "I feel like this family's living a life I wasn't invited to. And yet I'm the one whose name is on this house's deed, the one up at 5 a.m. working. I deserve to know, Mom whispered, eyes red. Thomas, I didn't tell you, because I thought you were already too tired. Dad gave a hollow laugh, chillingly cold. Well, let me lay it all out then. The company's in trouble. I mortgaged part of the factory in April. I thought I could turn it around, but it's only gotten worse. I hid it because I was scared. No one spoke. The kitchen froze. I gasped for breath. Every word was like a shard of broken glass reflecting the rawest, most painful truths. Dad looked at Mom. And if we're being honest, I'll say this too. We haven't been a real husband and wife for a while. How long? A year too. We sleep in separate rooms. Our conversations are about bills and dinner times. Mom turned away, but I saw her tears fall. When was the last time we held hands? She asked softly. I can't remember. I dropped my head to the table, unable to hold up my mask of strength. It felt like everything I believed in, relied on, was shattering. Matthew put his hand on my shoulder. This isn't just about you. It's about all of us. About how this family chose silence over talking. He looked at Dad. I know you grew up in a family that never talked about feelings, but we're repeating that and making it worse. Dad stayed silent. He didn't argue. He didn't deny. Mom spoke through small sobs. Last night, I reread your grandmother's letter, the one she left in her old recipe book. She wrote, "Silence is the sharpest knife." She looked at me, and she said, "If one day you see your family breaking because of silence, speak up no matter how hard." I looked at each of them, Mom, Dad, Matthew, and realized I wasn't the only one feeling alone in this family. We'd all been lonely, each in our own way. Later, Matthew spoke. I think we need a real talk. All of us. Not just Mom, Dad, Emily, and me. The whole family, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents. One time to say everything. Mom nodded. A family gathering. A real circle, not a cycle of secrets. Dad didn't speak, but for the first time his eyes softened. That afternoon I went to the backyard where Grandma used to grow lavender. The grass was overgrown, but a few purple stalks stood quietly in the cold wind. I knelt, scooping a handful of damp earth. It felt strangely safe. Grandma was here once. Mom grew up here. And now I was trying to find myself again in this place. We'd started untying the knots of secrecy, but many more waited to be unraveled. That evening, Mom knocked on my door. Tomorrow, can you help me prep for a family lunch? I want to invite everyone. I nodded, my heart heavy. Part of me wanted to run to escape it all, but a bigger part wanted to stay, to understand, to forgive. The next morning, as Mom chopped apples for her traditional chicken salad, I asked, "When you sold Grandma's jewelry, did you cry?" She stopped. Yes, but I thought she'd understand. She once told me, "Don't keep something for nostalgia, if you can use it to save the present." The morning after that tearful lunch, I woke early. Late autumn sunlight streamed through my old room's window, reflecting off photos I'd hung as a teenager. Everything was still there. Memories untouched, only the people had changed. I went downstairs to make coffee and found Mom at the dining table, her hair slightly messy, her face pale, but her eyes brighter. She placed an old, worn, leather-bound book on the table. "My old recipe book," she said. "I was looking for your favorite waffle recipe, and found this." She opened to the middle, pulling out a yellowed sheet of paper with Grandma's familiar, slanted handwriting. I froze. It was her. Mom said nothing, just slid the paper toward me. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The letter began simply, "To my daughter, if you're reading this, your family is probably facing something hard to say." I read aloud each word, cutting into my heart. "My dear, I know you're strong, but sometimes the strongest are the most tired. And our family, the Wilsons, has a dangerous habit staying silent when we should speak, enduring when we should share. If one day your family breaks because of silence, remember, silence is the sharpest knife. Talk to each other even when it's hard." My voice broke. I couldn't read on. Matthew walked in, saw us, and stopped. "Mom said call everyone down. I think we need to read this together." 15 minutes later, we sat around the dining table, Dad, Matthew, me, Rachel, and unexpectedly Grandma, who'd been invited. She sat by the window, leaning on her cane, nodding as I began reading the letter again. The kitchen was utterly silent. Not awkward silence, but the rare kind when everyone truly listens. I read, "We don't speak because we fear misunderstanding, but we hurt each other tenfold by keeping things inside. You can't save a family by carrying the load alone. Everyone must speak to be heard, to be understood." I glanced at Dad. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Mom cried quietly, lips pressed tight. Rachel held Matthew's hand. And I felt like Grandma was standing somewhere in this room, watching us learn the lesson she'd lived. When I folded the letter, no one spoke for a few minutes. Then Mom said softly, "Your grandmother wrote this when your grandfather was alive, during a time he lost his job and didn't tell anyone. I watched my parents' silent unraveling and thought I'd avoided it. But I repeated it exactly." She turned to Dad. "I'm sorry. Not just for hiding the money, but for believing I had to protect everyone alone." Dad looked at her. After a moment, he said, "I'm sorry too. For thinking hard work was enough. I've been absent from this family's life for a long time, even while I'm here." Grandma, silent, until now spoke. "You think this is new? Every generation in this family has lived like this. My parents, your great-grandparents, lost their first son and never spoke his name again. I only learned it from an old photo in a wooden box." We all fell silent. "We think we're protecting each other by staying quiet," she continued. "But we're passing down a broken pattern to the next generation. Don't talk, don't face, don't ask for help." I felt an undercurrent rising, washing away layers of dust from each of our hearts. When everyone left the table, Mom called me back. She placed the letter, now sealed in a thin plastic sleeve, in my hand. "This belongs to you," she said, "because you were the first to ask, 'What's going on?'" I looked at her. "Mom, are you mad that I got angry?" She gave a sad smile. "No, I'm glad. Because you got angry, it means you still care." That night I took the letter to my room, placing it beside the necklace Mom hadn't sold. I traced each word, imagining Grandma's face as she wrote dim yellow light, trembling hands, but a heart steadier than ever. I thanked her silently, not just for the words, but for daring to say what her generation wasn't allowed to. Tomorrow was the extended family gathering Mom and Matthew were planning. For the first time, it wasn't just a fun meal. It was for everyone to speak truthfully. A circle, not a ritual, but a connection. I didn't know what would happen. Maybe tears. Maybe anger. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. Because I'd learned silence can slowly kill a family. But one honest word, even late, can start the healing. That afternoon, my parents' living room was cleared of chairs, replaced with cushions arranged in a semicircle. Mom brewed a large pot of tea, placing it beside a basket of butter cookies. A quiet invitation. "Sit down." Be honest. Grandma couldn't come due to back pain, but sent a small note for Mom to read. No extended relatives were invited. Just the immediate family, me, Mom, Dad, Matthew, and Rachel. 5 people. 1 circle. No one spoke for the first few minutes. Outside, late autumn wind rustled golden leaves against the window. My heart pounded. I had to start. Because I too had hidden so much. "I'll go first," I said, my voice shaky. "Because I think I'm the reason this all broke open." All eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath and began. "I lost my job 6 months ago. Everything started falling apart, my lease, health insurance, medication costs. I had migraines so bad some weeks I couldn't leave my bed. I sold almost everything I owned, and I didn't tell anyone." I looked at Mom. "You helped me in a way I didn't know, but I should have been honest from the start." No one interrupted. No one judged. Just a slight nod from Dad and Mom's sad, gentle eyes. After a moment, Dad spoke, I think. "It's my turn." He looked at his calloused hands, then up. "My construction company's in serious trouble. I've hidden it too long. Bank loans remortgaging this house. No one knew, not even your mother. I thought I had to do it to protect my pride, but really, I was scared of being seen as a failure." A long silence followed. I saw Mom place her hand lightly on Dad's knee. No blame, no complaints, just a touch like 2 people who hadn't truly seen each other in a while. Mom went next. She sat straight, eyes wet. "You said you feared being seen as a failure," she said to Dad, "but I feared being forgotten. Being a mother, a wife for decades. I forgot what it's like to live for myself. I wanted to paint, to teach again, but I put it all aside. Then when you kids left and you were so busy, I was left alone with the roles I'd chosen." Dad bowed his head. Matthew looked down. My heart tightened. Mom had been silently starving for connection, and none of us noticed. Matthew gave a small, humorless laugh. "Guess it's my turn." My brother, always calm, always proper, looked like he might break in two. When we were kids, I was praised for being good. But when Emily became the brilliant, independent, decisive one, all eyes shifted to her. I don't blame anyone, but it felt like being left behind. Every time Mom said Emily needs more time or she's busy, I felt like I was just filling space. I was stunned. I'd never imagined Matthew could feel that way. He was always the steady one, the one who stayed, who didn't cause trouble. Rachel took his hand. You told me, but I think you need to hear this from your family. No one cried loudly, but everyone's eyes were red. Because the things we'd never said were finally breathing. I looked around. Every person in this room had carried a burden, and the saddest part was we'd all carried them alone. Mom stood, went to the bookshelf, and pulled out a leather journal. She opened it and handed me a pen. Write what you need from this family to not feel alone anymore. I wrote listen without judging, check in without pushing. Let me say no when I'm not ready. Dad wrote, I need to know I'm still meaningful even if I'm not the financial backbone. Mom, I need space for myself sometimes, not as a mother or wife, just me. Matthew, I need to be seen without having to be the silent sacrificer. Rachel didn't write, she just nodded, eyes full of tears. I think I understand this family more today than in the last 10 years combined. We sat together until late afternoon. The tea went cold. Crumbs littered the tablecloth. But no one left. Finally, Dad said softly, Can we make a new deal? I nodded. No more secrets, even the smallest ones. And no using silence as a tool, Mom added. Matthew said, even if what we say sounds weak. I said, starting tomorrow, we each have to share one honest thing. Even something small. But it has to be true. I stepped onto the porch as the sun set. The air was chilly. In my hand was the journal where we'd all written what we needed. I knew this wasn't the end. But it was a beginning, a first time seeing each other as full people, not roles. Tomorrow I'd talk to Matthew alone. I owed him a thank you and an apology. But tonight I wanted to hold on to this rare lightness when everything hidden had been brought to light. I used to think memories clung to you naturally, but they choose their moments to return, especially when you're ready to face them. After that gathering, I began seeing my childhood differently. Not just the perfect family photos plastered on the fridge, but the gaps. The things no one ever said. I remember when I was 9, Mom crying in the bathroom. I'd come home early because my teacher was out. Hearing the water running, I pressed my ear to the door and caught her stifled sobs. When she came out, eyes red, she said, Must be allergic to new perfume. I believed her. Not because I was naive, but because I understood not to ask further. In our house, you didn't probe what made others uncomfortable. Dad was the same. One year, he came home with a long cut on his hand, a work accident. When I asked, he gave a curt laugh. Wood doesn't play nice. Nothing more. We were taught that strength meant silence. That love could be shown through actions, but shouldn't be spoken unless necessary. Fear, hurt, anger, they were tucked away, hidden under blankets, buried in quiet dinners and busy mornings. I thought that was right. That not speaking meant not hurting anyone. I was wrong. For 6 months, I lived in the ashes of things unsaid. I lied to keep Mom from worrying. I smiled to make Dad think I was fine. I avoided Matthew to dodge explanations. I hid everything because I thought I should. In that silence, I learned something crucial. Silence doesn't preserve bonds. Sometimes it's the deepest, coldest cut of all. Days after our family talk, we didn't speak much. Not out of avoidance, but because we were all reflecting. The house felt like it had weathered a storm calm, but not easy to breathe in. One evening, as I washed glasses in the kitchen, Mom came in. She sat at the dining table cradling a mug of hot tea like it was something fragile. Do you remember when your grandmother was silent for 2 weeks after Grandpa died? She asked. I nodded. I was young. I thought she was being strong. But later, I learned she didn't know what to say. She'd lived her whole life in a world where good women spoke little. She looked at me, eyes misty. I carried that into how I raised you. I taught you to endure, but not to share. Her words pierced me like a needle. And I knew I had to do something different. The next morning I made coffee and called everyone to sit down. Not for a big talk, but to ask one question. If we want real change, what's the first step? Dad spoke first. I think we need someone to guide us. Not because we don't love each other, but because we don't know how to love right. Matthew nodded. Like when I work on a project, we call an engineer to check the foundation. Feelings are the same. That evening, Mom found a family therapist in Burlington, Dr. Helen Winters, who'd worked with families like ours. Dad resisted at first. Talking to a stranger about private matters doesn't sit right. But then he nodded. If you kids need it, I'll do it. I walked to the backyard. The early winter wind made me shiver. But a strange warmth crept into my heart, not because everything was fixed, but because for the first time I knew I didn't have to be silent to be loved. I used to think family change started with something big, a fight, a shocking confession, an irreversible event. But sometimes it begins with something simple, a circle. Mom proposed it. One evening after dinner, when the house had settled after stormy days, she said slowly, "This weekend everyone's coming, right? Grandma, Grandpa, Aunt Chloe, Uncle Ben, the kids." Dad nodded. "First time in 3 years." Mom looked around the table, pausing at me. "So, if everyone's here, why don't we try something we've never done?" She called it the truth circle. We kept it simple chairs in a circle in Grandpa's large living room, close enough to see each other's eyes, spacious enough not to feel stifled. Each person would share one thing they'd never said to someone in the family. No one was forced, but everyone was heard. Vermont in November was chilly. Outside, dry maple leaves formed a soft brown-red carpet in the yard. Inside, 3 generations of Wilsons sat in a circle, each holding a mug of hot cocoa or cinnamon tea. Aunt Chloe went first, her voice soft but steady. "When I was a kid, I broke Mom's wedding vase and blamed Ben. I've never admitted it. I'm sorry." Grandpa, now in his 70s, chuckled. "I knew all along, Chloe." The circle laughed lightly. It was the perfect start. Uncle Ben went next. "When Mom was sick last year, I was angry. Not because she was ill, but because I was scared. I hid it by ignoring calls from home." "I'm sorry." My cousin Sarah admitted she felt invisible with everyone focused on Matthew and me. But now I see. Maybe I didn't give anyone a chance to see me clearly. Grandpa surprised us most. He set his tea down, hands trembling. "There's something I never told your grandmother. When we were young with 2 small kids, I felt so much pressure I wanted to run away. But one night, seeing her asleep on the sofa with you kids, I saw something in her closed eyes, trust. And I stayed." Grandma froze, then took his hand. "I wish you'd told me sooner, but thank you for staying." Then it was my turn. I spoke about the migraines that left me bedridden, unable to open my eyes or smell food. About the shame of selling my city dreams to survive each month. About crying on the bathroom floor because I couldn't pay the electric bill. I spoke about my fear of being seen as a failure, and how it left me alone. When I finished, no one interrupted. No one asked questions. They were just there, listening. Matthew after me took a deep breath. "I always thought Emily would leave us forever. Not because she's bad, but because she's strong. So strong no one could reach her. And maybe because of that, I was jealous." He turned to me. "I'm sorry I never said it," Mom whispered when her turn came. "I taught you kids how to get up but never how to fall, because I didn't know how. That might be my biggest mistake." Dad, the family's rock, finally spoke. "I thought if I worked hard enough, stayed strong enough, everyone would feel safe. But I forgot. Safety isn't silence. And being the backbone doesn't mean I don't need support." When he finished, I saw something soften in Mom's eyes, and for the first time in years, she leaned her head on his shoulder. The circle ended in quiet sobs. No one spoke more, but we were all lighter. We hadn't changed completely. Wounds don't heal in one night. But something had been undone. After the truth circle, the air in our family shifted. The cracks didn't vanish, but light began to seep through. Mom and I sat on the porch one Sunday afternoon. It was still chilly, but the sun was warm enough to soothe the heart. In my hand was Grandma's handkerchief given to me after the circle. One thing remained unsaid. "Mom," I said, calmer than I expected, "I've thought a lot about the money." She squeezed my hand. "I know. You can pay it back when you're able. No rush." I shook my head. "No, I won't pay it back." She paused but stayed silent, waiting. "If I pay it back, it's like denying why you sent it. I don't want to turn an act of love into a transaction." She sighed. "So what's your plan?" I pulled a folded paper from my jacket. It was a plan I'd written the night before Sleepless. I called it the Sanders Family Fund Transparency and Support. The idea was simple. Each month, family members who could would contribute a small amount. No obligation, no burden. Just willingness. The fund would help anyone in the family facing hardship, health work, tuition, or even a bus ticket home for Thanksgiving. But unlike before, every expense would be discussed, open, transparent. No more secret money, no anonymous help, just trust and agreement. Mom read it silently for a long time. I thought she'd say no, but she folded the paper and handed it back. "You've really grown." That was all she said. But her eyes, lighter than they'd been in months, told me she agreed. A few days later, Matthew invited me for coffee at the old diner we used to visit in high school. Nothing had changed except us. "I have a proposition," he said after we ordered. I raised an eyebrow, half curious, half wary. Dad's company is still restructuring. I need help with internal finances, reviewing contracts, optimizing budgets. It's not permanent, just until you find what you really want. I froze. Not because Mom asked. Not because you're my sister. It's a real job. Real pay. And if you're not good, I'll fire you without hesitation. I laughed. Real romantic Matt, I know. Back home, I opened the email about renewing my New York lease. For the first time, I didn't feel sick hitting decline. 3 weeks later, I moved to Vermont. Not to my parents' house, but a small apartment 15 minutes away. 2 bedrooms, quiet enough to work close enough for Sunday dinners. I took the temporary job at Dad's company, and honestly, I was surprised to enjoy the boring numbers more than I expected. Matthew was a strict but fair boss, and for the first time in months, I felt useful again. We started calling our monthly gatherings no hiding dinners. They weren't always about big revelations. Sometimes it was small, like Mom's failed sourdough attempt. Sometimes heavier, like my admission that I still felt anxious about falling in love again. Dad stopped being the man who only sighed over financial reports. He's taken up gardening. Yes, Thomas Sanders, infamous for "no plant survives me," now tends herb pots with near affection. Soil gives honest feedback, he says. Unlike the stock market, Matthew and I used to be on opposite sides. Now we grow tomatoes together. Literally. I plant on my balcony, he in his backyard. We send each other photos of their progress. For the first time, I see our sibling bond not as duty, but joy. Sometimes I think the real miracle of these 3 months isn't the new job, the new home, or the therapy sessions. It's that Mom no longer checks my bank account. After that big gathering, I set up the Sanders Family Fund, a transparent account where anyone needing help can ask with clear rules, no secrets, no pressure. Everyone has the right to say no. Mom was the first to contribute. She told me that day, "For the first time, I don't feel I have to sacrifice to keep this family stable. I'm building with you, not carrying the weight alone." Her words stayed with me all fall. I'm not sugarcoating this. We still argue. Some weeks, Mom scolds me for not calling. Matthew and I bickered over a balance sheet once. Dad missed a dinner because he forgot. But now, after every misstep, we know how to find our way back. I've learned healing isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. Each loop moves forward a bit, but sometimes dips back. The key isn't never hurting, but not hurting alone anymore. I asked Mom once, "Do you regret hiding the money from me?" She looked at me for a long time, then said, "I don't regret helping you, but I regret not trusting you enough to ask first." It was the first time I saw Mom, the always strong, always predicting woman, admit a mistake without covering it up. I loved her more for it. 3 months have passed and winter is here. Snow hasn't fallen yet, but the air is crisp. I'm writing this in my small kitchen, holding a mug of hot cocoa filled with gratitude. Not because everything's perfect, but because I now have a family that doesn't hide in silence anymore. We've come a long way since that fateful October dinner, but the small steps, slow and steady, are guiding us toward the light. And then a new letter arrived. December brought the first snow. Vermont was draped in a shimmering white coat, pristine, as if winter meant to erase the old for something new. I stood by my apartment window 15 minutes from my parents' house, holding a warm mug of cocoa, watching snowflakes drift lazily to the ground. Something in me had shifted. Not loudly, not clearly, but steadily, like the winter cold, one day at a time, quietly. Tonight was our December family dinner. No special occasion, no birthdays, no Thanksgiving, no Christmas. Just us wanting to be together. Mom texted earlier in the week, "Bring an empty stomach and an open heart, sweetheart." And one more thing, Mom set out the fancy china, the kind reserved for formal holidays or when we used to pretend everything was fine. But this time it wasn't for show. It was to honor the truth. When I stepped into the familiar house, the smell of Mom's roasted meat pie greeted me like a warm hug. The Christmas tree stood in the living room corner, bare of ornaments. Mom said we'd decorate it together after dinner. Dad was setting out crystal glasses on the table. Matthew nodded at me from the sofa with a smile. Megan, his wife, was checking the oven for her baking pie, and I, as if stepping back into an older version of myself, entered this scene without feeling like a stranger. We sat down at 6 p.m. sharp. Plates were passed, cutlery clinked against the crisp white tablecloth. No one rushed to speak, but the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was just full warm. Dad broke it first. He set his fork down, looked around, and said in a low, warm voice, "I'm proud, because we didn't choose to stay silent." No one responded right away, but I saw Mom's eyes glisten. Matthew squeezed Megan's hand, and I smiled, a real smile. We'd come a long way to get here. After dinner, Mom called me to the kitchen. In her hands was a small, polished wooden box. I recognized it instantly, Grandma's jewelry box, gone nearly a decade. She said nothing, just opened it. Inside was a silver pendant, delicate as thread, exquisitely crafted. I knew it immediately, the pendant Grandma wore in old photos. Mom carefully opened it. Inside was a tiny photo, our family when I was about 8. Dad, Mom, Matthew, and me, all smiling, sunlight filtering through Mom's hair, Dad's arm around us. "Your grandmother left this for you," Mom said softly, but I held on to it. It wasn't time yet. I looked up, meeting her eyes full of love and atonement. I said nothing. I just reached for the pendant. My fingers brushed the cold silver, but my heart felt warm. "Thank you, Mom," I whispered. We hugged. No need for more words. That embrace said it all. Forgiveness, gratitude, a fresh start. Later, we gathered in the living room. Mom brought out the box of Christmas ornaments. Dad played carols on the old radio. We hung baubles and ribbons together. I realized so much was still the same, but so much was different. We no longer spoke empty words to avoid truth. No longer forced smiles through inner storms. No longer saw strength as a condition for love. That night, as I hung the final silver star on the tree, I looked at my family, Mom and Dad, sitting close, Matthew carrying Megan around the room, because she won the gift-guessing game, and I, for the first time in years, felt I truly belonged. Before leaving, I paused at the threshold, looking back at the warm room. Mom came over, kissing my forehead lightly. "Every winter has its reason, Emily. Not to freeze, but to prepare for spring." I smiled. Grandma would have said the same. The pendant rested warmly against my chest, close to my heart. And I knew the most precious thing it held wasn't just the photo. It was memory. It was a lesson. It was truth. After all the highs, lows, hurts, and unspoken things, my family stepped out of the darkness, not with perfection, but with truth. We learned to listen, not just with ears, but with hearts. This story isn't just my healing journey, but a reminder. A family isn't a place without mistakes, but one with enough love to fix them. If you've ever stayed silent when you should have spoken, or held yourself strong when you could have been soft, I hope my story resonates. You're not alone. And it's never too late to start again with honesty. Thank you for joining me through these 12 chapters. If this story touched you in any way, leave a comment below, share your thoughts, and don't forget to follow the channel for more stories, truthful, warm, and full of hope. We'll meet again.